Wait till our group comes in here. Hey, Ryan, can you hear us? Oh, boy.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. It's a good one. Let us know when we're ready to go. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We just want to give you an update on the situation out in Western Alaska. So myself and several of my team members, including Ryan Anderson, Commissioner of Department of Transportation, as well as General Sachs, our National Guard and a general, as well as several others, went out to Western Alaska. We left Monday morning, went to Bethel. We were able to get out to Newtalk, Hooper Bay, Scammon Bay, did a flyover in Chivak, and surveyed the impacts of the storm in that area. We also went on to Nome, Alaska, observed the impacts of the storm at Nome, as well as Gulliven and Elam. We had a brief stop in Koyuk, but we had to reboard the helicopter because of weather closing in pretty quick. And so our goal is to get back out there on the 1st of October to see how much work has been done by our teams. But first of all, I want to thank a whole host of organizations for their work. I want to first of all thank the folks of Western Alaska who are living there, who are helping each other, helping their neighbors, had to deal with this ordeal, dealt with it extremely well. As we mentioned, there was no deaths, no injuries, nobody is missing. Neighbor helping neighbor, friend helping friend, and schools were opened to act as evacuation centers. There were shelters opened. But for the most part, people are now recovering and digging out. And so what we observed was there's certainly damage impacts in Hooper Bay and Scammon Bay and Newtalk and a few other communities, we've been told, in the lower Kuskokwim and lower Yukon areas. What we observed was severe impacts, for example, on the road from Nome to Council. And Commissioner Ryan Anderson will talk about that here in a moment. Impacts in Gulliven. Gulliven consists of two parts of the town. One's on a bit of a hill, one's on the spit. The spit was impacted pretty hard by this storm. Connexes were washed off the spit. Some of those connexes are almost a mile or 2 miles across the bay, beached. Houses were knocked off their foundation. A lot of water. Electrical impacts, airport, not necessarily in Gulliven, but other places, airport impacts. But going back to Gulliven, there were structures impacted, teacher housing, for example. Folks are drying out, digging out. And so there's a lot of work that needs to take place in Gulliven. Elam on their front street, it was impacted there. Water breached their front street that in some cases acts also as a bit of a levee. And there were structures impacted there as well. The road from Elam to Moses Point, where a lot of folks have fish camps and they put their boats in, there's also a FAA transponder out there. That road was hit pretty hard, just like the road going from Nome to Council. So infrastructure issues, road issues, there's erosion out there. But again, the recovery has begun. I want to thank a lot of the native corporations, Bering Straits as well as Shalista, and local corporations in the area that were affected by the storm, tribal governments, municipal governments, our state agencies as well, our National Guard, our State Defense Force. Just a whole host of folks are responding in kind the way we do here in Alaska. And so with that, what I'd like to do is turn this over to our National Guard General, General Sachs, to talk a little bit about what response is happening. Maybe I skipped Brian here. No, Commissioner Sachs. And talk a little bit about the folks we have out there, what the focus is going to be, and how long we're going to be out to potentially helping these folks recover. So, General?
Well, thanks, Governor. And boots on the ground are so very critical to talk to people where they're at, to get their concerns. Everyone has a story. Every community has a unique situation to go forward. But we are also very aware that winter's on the way, so that is a concern for every single person. To that end, we activated the State Defense Force over the weekend, about 20 people local. That was a big help. Those are people in the communities. But as far as the big effort over the last couple of days, roughly 130 guardsmen, naval militia, and state defense. Helping with storm cleanup, and generally talking to people, to be in the communities and ask them what they need and then take that input for action. That is so very important. Now, as far as assets in the region, I mentioned there's 130 members currently between Nome, Bethel, and surrounding areas. We're using helicopters to go out to these satellite communities. By and large, they are staying in those communities, helping out, and when they're done, they're coming back. So it's going to change based on the day, based on where we go. Also, we are doing tree and stump cutting, and of course, this is a humanitarian mission. We want to go out with compassion. We want to talk to the people and make sure that we're taking care of their needs. With that, I will turn it over to transportation.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. Thank you, Governor. General Sachs. Yeah, as the governor stated, we were able to get on the ground in a lot of locations and see the infrastructure and the condition. I'm going to highlight a few of the areas where we're working and where we saw some concerns. In regards to airports, none of these communities are connected to the contiguous road system, and airports are a critical link. Our airport system performed well. All airports on the West Coast are operational. And as of today, all of our lighting systems are working. Our DOT personnel and contractors have done the work it takes to make sure that all of our airports are up and running. We have heard reports of problems with the FAA weather systems, that some are still out. There's some outages out there, and we're working closely with FAA to ensure we can get those back up online this fall here. In regards to the roads, some of the examples we observed, so for Nome, for example, Nome Front Street had several miles. It was a paved road, very damaged. The pavement's torn up. There's debris, rocks, a lot of damage that needs to be repaired. And then, as the governor alluded to, the Nome Council Road, that road has been heavily damaged. We're estimating between 5 and 10 miles of that road have been completely obliterated. An additional 5 to 10 miles have heavy damage. There were 2 bridges located on that road. The bridges are in good shape, but the abutments and the surrounding approaches have been damaged. In addition, we also have a section of road that was breached, which means that when the storm and the waves overtopped into the lagoon behind the road, it actually created an open channel. And that depth, we still haven't confirmed of that channel, but it's a large section, and we're working on a solution to repair that breach as well. Some other locations, such as Gulliven, we've observed approximately probably 3 miles of roads from preliminary estimates that have been washed out that need to be repaired. And as the governor alluded to, an Elam Front Street, which was a paved road, also was completely destroyed. And we're working through that to get the repairs going. We do have a plan. We're actively, we have engineers out there on scene. We have surveyors. We have an airplane right now in Nome waiting for the weather to clear, and we're going to map this entire area along Norton Sound to make sure we're documenting these damages, and we're moving forward to repair them. We've also already mobilized contractors in the Nome area to begin work on the Nome Front Street, as well as the Nome Council Road. So that work is happening immediately. And we're currently today engaging with contractors to address these other communities along Norton Sound so that we can begin that process to repair those roads. And we're working with local stakeholders and the communities out in the Norton Sound area to make sure this is all coordinated along with the SEOC and General Sachs. But as the governor has stated, winter season is coming. We recognize that. We have a short time window here that we're working with, and so we're being very aggressive to get all of our folks, our contractors mobilized and get this work done. All right. Thank you, Governor.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. Let's go to Director Fisher. Say a few words.
Thank you, Governor. In addition to the infrastructure damage that Commissioner Anderson just spoke about, the governor referred to home damage throughout the communities he visited. We're seeing that kind of throughout the entire impact area. So I wanted to talk about the disaster declaration process and steps. What are the next steps moving forward? So as you know, the governor declared a disaster last Saturday. On Tuesday, he requested a major disaster declaration from FEMA and to the president. That's record time to ask for one of those types of disasters. Just for example, in 2011, we requested a federal disaster more than a month after that storm hit and received that about a month later. The type of disaster that we've asked for is really going to bring additional federal resources, people, equipment, things, as well as, most importantly, financial support to the state. The governor has asked for a 100% cost share to be provided by the federal government. That's specific because of our, folks living at or near the poverty level in rural communities, subsistence lifestyle, and we're hopeful with the delegation's support that will be looked on favorably. The state's disaster programs are up and running now. We're focused right now on getting things like plywood, insulation, tin for roofs out to the communities now. That's kind of a separate program that's happening right away to make sure we can button up homes and make sure residents out there have a safe and warm place to be before winter shows up. Past that, we are working with the rest of the programs that we have. Things like fish camp structures, hunting camp structures that were destroyed, smoke shacks, subsistence gear, as well as the typical things you'd think of for home and residential damage to roofs and walls and loss of Toyo stoves. All of that is eligible under our programs. FEMA is considering that right now, looking for the federal programs to come to bear. I think the good news is that their programs mirror the state's. So the things that we're able to support, things like ATVs and boats and boat motors, as well as the structures that were lost along the shore, like the governor referred to out at Moses Point, fish camps, we'll be able to help support the rebuilding of those structures as we move forward here. FEMA can do the same thing if they come. The FEMA administrator is coming to Alaska tomorrow, right from Puerto Rico, in her response to Hurricane Fiona. She'll be up here tomorrow, and we're going to be going out into the area over the weekend to meet with officials and look at the damage so she can get eyes on it herself. Thank you. Governor?
So with that, Jeff, we'll open it for questions. And who do you want to begin with?
Governor, we'll start here in the room, and our first question comes from Yerith Rosen with the Alaska Beacon.
Okay, so it's kind of like a two-part question. In hindsight, do you think there could have been a better preparation, a better way to prepare for this storm? And looking into the long term, how will this storm inform in infrastructure investments?
Yeah, okay, good question. So when we were out there, a lot of people thanked us for being there. We want to thank the National Weather Service because they had predicted the storm was heading their way. So a lot of folks did the best they could to prepare. But again, you're dealing with remnants of a typhoon. It's a large, major natural disaster, stretched over 1,000 miles of our coastline. So in terms of preparation, when you're dealing with something of that magnitude, you do the best you can to prepare for it. You can't stop it. Obviously, we know that. And so what we'll do is, again, assess where the breaches were, as we mentioned, and Commissioner Anderson was alluding to. We'll have a discussion as to how we beef up those barriers. So, for example, in Elam, where their road is a road, the front street is the road, but it also acts sort of as a levee. Do we help and assist with lifting that road up another foot or two to deal with what could be another storm in the next 10, 15, 20 years of some magnitude, or even higher? When we look at the road in Nome, going to from Nome to Safety and Council, what do we do there as well? And so we were in Newtok, and Newtok, as you know, has been eroding for some time on the river. a portion of their village has already moved to the new site, which we flew over, and there's construction ongoing there as well. And so really the discussions, I think, have to be along the lines of how severe was this storm? What do we anticipate in the future? I mean, there could be storms of larger magnitudes. How do you necessarily prepare for that? That'll be a discussion. But again, when I first went to rural Alaska, and as you know, I lived out there for 20 years. I lived in a small village called Koyuk, and we had seen trees and stumps considerably inland up on the tundra, and that was a result of the storm in '74. So the storms happen. You're living on the Bering Sea in the North Pacific. We're going to get storms. We're going to get natural disasters. But really what we need to do is look at what the long-term future predictors are for this type of weather. And again, do what we can to make preparations for the storms. What that's going to look like, that'll be a discussion for the future.
And our next question is from Iris Samuels with the Anchorage Daily News.
Thanks. So my question is just about the current cost estimate for addressing the damages, and then also looking forward, when you expect to update that estimate and have a final estimate of the damages.
So the assessment is still happening as we speak. You'll be getting updates hopefully every few days, probably at least once a week, as to what the costs are and what we're really looking at. But it's difficult right now to estimate those costs because it depends on what kind of repairs are going to happen on these roads especially. And things, like I said, when we had the earthquake back in 2018-19, we didn't know what some of the structural damage was until the assessment took place, and folks were looking at the bridges, looking at the roads for some time to make sure, because again, it happened at the beginning of winter, to make sure those structures were sound. So we anticipate we'll find things that nobody has yet seen that needs to be worked on. So those estimates will probably be stretching out into the future, but nonetheless, we should start to get some estimates here pretty soon on the roads and the airports.
Okay, before we go to questions on the teleconference line, I'm going to ask a question for reporter Jenny Monet at the Nome Nugget. And it says follows, that the state of Alaska, in its request for federal disaster relief, is also asking FEMA to deliver 100% in aid absent any match requirements from the state or tribal governments. Was this specific request related in any way to obstruct the 20% match that tribes have long complained is burdensome in seeking coastal erosion relief aid in the past? And secondly, are there any primary concerns that should the 100% request from FEMA not be delivered?
Brian.
Thank you for that question. So the reason that we asked for the 100% cost share for that, I had mentioned previously. Many federal agencies have different cost shares that they place upon our local jurisdictions throughout the state. In FEMA's case, it's typically 75% federal funding and 25% state of Alaska or local funding that's required when there is a disaster to recover and rebuild. And we feel that that's just not acceptable, particularly with how fast we need to move and the status of the communities out there. I think the good news is that if we don't get that 100% federal funding, the governor has already requested $10 million to start out of the state's disaster relief fund to help provide that non-federal share. So that cost doesn't go on to local communities. The state of Alaska picks that up. The legislature has funded that in advance for disasters such as this. So the good news is that funding, that cost won't go through to the local jurisdictions. But we're hopeful that we're treated equitably. You saw 100% cost share potentially for some of the cost for Hurricane Fiona for Puerto Rico. We feel it's important that we be treated fairly and equitably, just like other states that have significant disasters like this one.
All right, now let's go to the teleconference line. First question from Zachariah Hughes at the Anchorage Daily News. Zachariah?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Governor, you mentioned living in Koyuk, and I know you played basketball and traveled to a lot of the villages out there in the region over your time living and teaching there. And I wonder what it was like for you to go back to some of your old stomping grounds, places I'm sure you still have relationships and remember pretty well, and just how it made you feel seeing the state of things out along the coast as you've flown there the last few days.
Well, I got to tell you, when we landed in a number of those villages, we knew those people. I knew those people from years ago. We're all getting a little older. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, I mean, I was married in Nome. I lived in Koyuk. I knew folks in Elam and Gulliven. We were talking with the mayor of Gulliven, Charlie Brown, who I used to play basketball with and against in a lot of the tournaments, and he's doing a fine job out there helping his people. But there are folks out there who are tough people. They really are tough people, and they're the descendants of very, very tough people. And so living in the areas that they live in, they know that there's issues with flooding at times, there's issues with storms at times. We're battling right now. It's a race against time because unlike the tropics or unlike places such as Florida or Puerto Rico, we don't have the luxury of waiting because this freeze up is going to happen. And so everyone knows that and the urgency is there. But nonetheless, great to see some terrific people. I wish it was under different circumstances, but nonetheless, good to see folks. Good to see that they were, like we said, we didn't lose anybody. Nobody was injured. Nobody's missing, and that's important. But I got a lot of faith. I got a lot of faith in people in rural Alaska that they are pretty tough, pretty resilient. They were right on the spot in telling us in terms of things that they need. We told them they continually update us as to what they find because we're going to be there to help these communities become whole again and up on their feet here, hopefully in a few short weeks.
Okay, now let's go to Anna Rose MacArthur, News Director at KYUK Public Radio in Bethel.
Hi, thank you. Governor, what should people expect for replacement for the means of, let me start over. What should residents who've lost their subsistence gear, particularly who've lost their boats, what are their options and timeline that they should be expecting for any hope of replacing or having means to replace? I'm thinking of Chivac, where reporting shows that 90% of boats have been lost. Not only have people lost their subsistence foods in their freezers, but they've lost boats to then be able to replace that subsistence food by going out getting moose, getting seal. What should residents there expect for help for replacing those boats?
So we flew over Chivac and we actually saw the boats. Many of the boats are way upriver. Many are on land. It's going to take some time for those folks to actually retrieve those boats, recover those boats. Some of the boats were swamped. Nonetheless, this is part of the assessment process. As soon as we get the assessments in, we can start to work with folks on that. But again, we're going to move as fast as possible. I've told my people that we are under a 4-week deadline in terms of freeze up. And so, again, that's why we're going out there. Commissioner Anderson, myself, General Sachs, we're going back out there on the 1st of October, and we're going to spend time on the ground to see what has progressed from yesterday, the day before, up until October 1st, because we want to make sure these roads are being put in, these roads and these levees are being dealt with, and the assessments, such as the personal loss, is also being taken care of. So our departments are on it, our program directors are on it, and we're going to make sure that government moves pretty quickly in this case. But it's going to take just a little bit of time to get all those complete assessments in for us to be able to work at replacing and repairing.
Okay, thank you for that question, Anna Rose. Up next, Margie Bauman with the Cordova Times. Margie?
Yeah, thank you. My question's kind of related to KYUK's. That is, what is the food situation for feeding people in all these communities on a day-to-day basis? And for the families to store food for the winter, particularly in homes where refrigerators and freezers may have lost power or been otherwise become dysfunctional. If you complete the assessment within 4 weeks, how soon would they be able to get the refrigerators and freezers either repaired or replaced? And particularly for use for subsistence hunting. Thank you.
So again, Margie, a lot of these refrigerators and freezers you're referring to, it's not necessarily replacement. In some cases, power went out. Some cases, when the water inundated the house, the freezers were displaced and turned off. A lot of those are being obviously cleaned out, set up again. But I have to go back to the assessment. We're asking questions that right now we're getting the answers to as we speak. So again, we're going to move as quickly as possible. We have people in constant contact with folks on the ground. Their needs are going to be met. The number of stores we went into had food. Some of the stores were obviously wet, but had food, had supplies. There'll be thousands of pounds of food and water brought in. It's really about getting everything up and running and ready and prepared for winter. Because once the freeze sets in, that becomes more difficult, obviously. So getting those roads up, repairing bridges to the extent we can, removing debris, getting houses back on foundations. This is really going to be the goal. But in terms of food and everyday necessities, those things are going to be flown in. Those things are being flown in. And again, we think we're going to have a pretty good response, and we'll be able to report on this hopefully every few days as we go forward.
And now let's go to Mark Thiessen at Associated Press Alaska. Mark. Mark, are you with us? Do you have a question?
Maybe on mute.
Okay, we'll jump ahead to Mike Ross at Alaska's News Source. Mike? Okay, it looks like the end of the question and answers. We'll go to the governor for closing comments.
So again, there's definitely damage out there. There's definitely impacts that have disrupted lives. The loss of the roads, the loss of boats, the loss of the hunting season, fishing season for some is going to be problematic, but we're there to step in to try and help. Again, I spoke with the Director of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, today on a phone call, and I just said to him, look, the damage may not be as extensive as in Puerto Rico or some of the other places where we have hurricanes, but it's our timeline that's the issue. It's our remoteness that's the issue. It's our lack of infrastructure that's the issue. And we just need to make sure that we're not going to be bureaucratic when it comes to aid and getting people up and off their feet in the next 4 weeks. The 4 weeks we keep repeating over and over is really when freeze sets in western and northern Alaska. And after that, it makes it difficult to do a lot of these repairs. Not impossible, but difficult. Nonetheless, we want people in their homes. We want the homes dried out. We want homes back on their foundations. We want kids back in school. We want teachers in their housing. We want people to be able to access parts of their community that right now they can't. So it's all hands on deck. We're going to work very diligently at getting everything up and running. We'll give reports to the press. We'll be continually working with folks on the ground in those communities. But again, the people of Alaska are very resilient. Since my term in office, we've had earthquakes, we've had fires, we've had floods, we've had a pandemic. We've had just about everything you could think of. And we're still here. The people again are tough. The people are there helping each other, and we're going to be there as well. I just also want to mention that, as you know, the PFD came out this week, and we were stopped multiple times by folks thanking us for that program because right now, especially some of these affected areas, it's going to be a huge asset in helping folks get up pretty quickly. So again, I'm optimistic. We're going to move fast. I'm optimistic that we'll get things back up and running. But again, we'll be touching base with the press as this recovery moves on and is ongoing. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and we'll get back to you. Thank you, Alaska.